Yes, we are back again for another installment of What's on Your Workbench? The podcast where we ask life's most burning question, what's on your workbench? I think that the title is pretty self-explanatory.
And the answer isn't a mess, which is currently on my workbench. I can't even tell what I'm supposed to be working on. But as always, I'm Andrew with craftybeetroot.com. We have Chili from All Wood Solutions. And that was a very enthusiastic introduction. I'm feeling the vibe. I was like, oh, this more, and then whoa, okay, we're hitting it. So I am excited. I know we've kind of been talking a bit about what I suspect we're going to hear about what's on your workbench over the last couple of weeks, but Chili, what is on your workbench?
Woo, buddy. So I've been working on the cribbage table. And for those watching, you can see behind me here a little bit, that is the piece of wood that is the tabletop. And it's doesn't really show up terribly well from that far.
I thought that was two pieces. Oh, wow.
But you can kind of see the tracks are on it. Those were actually burned in by hand with a hand wood burner.
Yep.
But the real fun of it that I want to talk about was the layout and figuring out how to fit a cribbage table or a cribbage board on this really odd shaped, unique, beautiful piece of wood.
Yeah, I was looking at that and I'm like, I thought they were an oval, and I guess I don't know anything about cribbage, but how
this is not a traditional board.
Of course.
Yes, a traditional board has two turns on it. So you start on a straight, and then there's a wider turn, and it goes back down, and then there's a more narrow turn, and it comes up the middle to the finish. But really, the only thing that's important about it is that you have the correct number of holes in the track, which are 120. Okay. This is a 3-track board that you can play with 3 players. It's not very common that people play with 3 players, but my client is teaching their daughter how to play. So they definitely want to play 3 people at a time. So I'm doing a 3-track. So with the starting holes and the scorekeeping holes, all said and done, there's 390 holes that will be going into this piece of wood.
This sounds familiar. I remember a project with lots of holes in it.
Yes. and then those 390 holes will each be plugged with a nickel neodymium magnet.
Oh, nice.
And then the pegs will actually have a metal base.
Yep.
Because it'll be outside. You don't want holes in furniture outside. It allows moisture in. They get dirty and gunky and blah. So that was the solution to that. But the layout was really fun. I don't have the poster board right here anymore. But what I did was I taped together 2 pieces of poster board, laid them out, and laid my piece of wood on it, and then traced it out so that I had an idea of the surface area I had to work with. Then I cut out some random arced curves and some straight pieces. And I used a really large compass to make those. And started laying them out on the poster board to get a feel for how can I fit all of the tracks I need, all 24 pieces on this board. And then once I got it kind of figured out, I traced them on there, just outline traced. And then I grabbed this, which is a big old piece of acrylic.
Oh, wow. Nice.
So you can see the holes in the acrylic already if you're watching, which means I have already drilled 390 holes, and we'll be doing it again. But I traced the outside of my track onto the poster board, or onto the acrylic from the poster board. And the way I did that was I actually used the compass to find the center point of the arcs for each arc. And the way you do that is you go from the end of the most inward arc, and you draw an arc from that, and then you go from the other end and draw an arc, and you have a point where those lines cross.
Yep.
And you know that that is your center point. So I did that on the poster board first so that I could mark those points on my acrylic. Then I used the compass without a pencil in it. It has a sharp end on both sides. And I scribed all the arcs into the acrylic. So that was not only the inside and outside curve of each one, but the center line of all three of the tracks. So there's a total of 5 arcs per curved section.
Yep.
So I got those all laid out so that I could then lay out where my holes would go, so they're evenly spaced and look nice, and that they're all lined up. They're not like meandering all over the place. And then I started drilling 390 holes. So once I got that, the other thing I had to do was I drilled some smaller holes at some key intersection points, so that I could easily transcribe those points from the acrylic to the piece of wood. So I laid the wood down, laid the acrylic on top, and transferred all those key points onto the wood so that I could use my compass and get my compass set up, and then do the same thing to mark all those lines on the wood. The acrylic isn't really useful for transferring like the lines.
Yeah.
It's mostly for lining up the holes. But putting those key kind of indicator points, through the acrylic, that helps me then lay it out accurately on the wood. So now that I've got some layers of finish on it, I'll be able to put the acrylic over it and clamp it on so it doesn't move, and then drill out all 390 holes with a depth stop to make sure that my magnets sit flush when I get them put in. So yeah, it's been a lot of really tedious and mathematical work, but it's been fun. I've had a lot of fun doing it. It's been great.
Yeah, I can imagine that, just working through those problems and seeing it all come together, because it's like when you first do it, you're like, oh, now I need to space it out a little bit too much and now a little bit less, and just trying to get that exact number and that even spacing and have an overall look pleasing would be quite a challenge. So yeah, I have a couple questions.
Okay.
When you do with the shape of it, so you've got your 5 lines, are you drawing the outside line, or are you going to carve that into the wood, or is it just going to be the dots? Like, how are you going to outline it, I guess?
So all 5 of those lines for each section, they're already done. They're hand burned in.
They're the burning. Okay,
so,
sorry.
Yeah, so I marked it with pencil just as a guideline, and then I went back through by hand and followed all those lines, including the divider lines too between the sections. So I did that. I did yesterday. Got everything burned in, which took a good 2.5, 3 hours, I think.
Yeah. I remember when I was in the US, I had a wood burning tool, and I don't have one here. And every now and then I'm like, oh, I wish I just had a wood burning tool. I could just do that, and it would be a lot easier than trying to come up with some other thing. But yeah, no, that's awesome. I was like, for some reason I thought the lines were paper or pencil, even though you'd already told me that they were burnt in. So, and then the other question I had is, you're doing magnets in the board and metal on the peg. Is there a reason why you didn't do it the other way around? Metal in the board, magnet on the peg?
Yeah, that's a good question. I thought about doing that initially. The two things, though, that were prohibitive of that is that, one, I would have to cut that bar stock into all of those 390 little pieces.
Yep.
And I didn't want to do that. And the other thing is that since this is an outside table, the tops of those would all be prone to rusting.
Yep.
And then that, not just the pieces, the metal pieces themselves, but then that invites intrusion into the wood too.
Yep.
So a nickel neodymium magnet has a coating on it that's not going to rust. So, and they're already cut to size and they're wonderfully uniform.
Yeah.
So that I can drill all my holes just in a uniform way and then just go through and plug them with a magnet, and a drop of super glue.
Yep.
And we'll be
Yeah.
good.
They won't go anywhere. Oh man, that's awesome. That's gonna look so good.
It's exciting to see it starting to come together, and I think it is going to be pretty neat. I've only been doing the top so far. I got to start on the base next week, which is going to be pretty simple. I did come up with a new design for it, but it incorporates storage a little bit better this way too, because my client does want to have somewhere to put the pegs and the cards when they're not using the table. So it'll fulfill that a lot better. And there are cup holders going in it too.
Ooh, always useful. Always
Yep.
useful. No, that's awesome. This is why I wanted this podcast, because projects like this are just incredible to get through. It's all like I'm a sucker for the backstory. You know what I mean? It's like I want to know all the details about how we got to that point, because that's what I find the fascinating. I mean, the end product's always beautiful, but trying to figure out, well, how did you even come up with, like, what are the rules of cribbage and why can you do that? And it makes perfect sense. So no, I can't wait to see that come together. So I assume you're going to end up doing like a varnish or something over the top anyway, and that will help protect those magnets as well.
What's gone on already is a oil varnish blend.
Okay.
About 5 coats, and then I'll wait until I have the base done too, and the magnets in and everything, and then I'll do one more coat of oil varnish blend, but it will be heavier on the varnish than these coats are, and that will just really help seal everything up. The magnets are plenty strong enough to pull through that varnish coat. That's the nice thing about nickel neodymium magnets is, they're, for their size, they're pretty dang strong. So these are only like 3/16 by 3/16. Is I think what they are. And they hold 2.2 pounds each.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I love those. I love having magnets around, because you never know. Like, I've made like little boxes which, just to have them catch, you can just super glue in a bit of magnets, and there's your catch. You don't have to do anything fancy. So
yeah, definitely.
And then
the only downside is they won't be able to have anybody play at their table who has a pacemaker.
Yeah. Or you can't do like metal work near it, because all just metal filings will be everywhere. That's always my problem, when it's always like, oh, we can put magnets here, magnets there, and it's like, do I really want magnets around here? Because I have a lot of filings and pins and weird things that magnetics. But that's one thing I love about my old sewing machine that I got, is because it's a full solid metal. I just put magnets along the top, and that's where I store all my needles and pins. I don't have to have like extra storage spots. It's very useful. Cannot recommend having a surplus supply of magnets lying around for projects. So I've been thinking about my tool layout a little bit, and I actually think I'm going to incorporate magnets into that a little bit, I'm thinking about it. We'll see, just to make it a bit more customizable and not locked into certain shapes. But that's just something I've been percolating on as I do.
Yeah, I haven't built it yet, but I have a design for my French cleat wall that I'm going to build for my hand saws, and that just has magnets in it to hold them in. I think that'll be a lot easier.
Yeah, because when we moved into the house we're in, we've got one for our knives, and we don't actually put knives on it, because with the kids we're not that fond of having them out and about. But for scissors and just other things, it is useful. So
yeah, those are great.
Go magnets! That witchcraft and wizardry of magnets.
So, Andrew, what's been on your workbench?
Well, it's been the holidays, school holidays for the children. So I'd like to introduce a friend.
Yes.
So for those of you that couldn't see, because it's a podcast, I have a couple puppets. They're, as I put in the Facebook post where I described them, they are both happy memories and nightmare fuel. So this is probably the least offensive one. And to describe it, it basically looks like a Muppet from Sesame Street, except it's got red devil horns and red devil eyes. And my wife is not a fan of it, and she calls it the devil. And then because my son heard that, now that is his name, the devil. So that was appealing when I was making happy memories with the children. Then another one I made was, it was meant to be a dragon. Again, it makes pretty good nightmare fuel, but yeah, and this one is green. And again, it's based on basically a generic Muppet shape, but this one has big green spikes on it and big teeth and big bulging eyes and a tongue. But yeah, so it's almost a tradition now in my family that every year we make puppets. So last year we had 3 weeks of lockdown in Australia. Well, we had more than that, but there was 3 weeks of the children at home and I was on holidays, on vacation as well. And I decided to do a craft every day with the children. This was a mistake. So, I mean, and to be honest, some of it was just painting or drawing, and then other parts of it were, make a puppet. And then I made sock puppets, and those sock puppets actually turned out really good. My wife had some like big fluffy socks left over from, Christmas present I gave her years ago, and I enhanced it a little bit. And the kids really enjoyed it, and they love their puppets. Like my youngest will go to sleep with the puppet on his hand. And so for many years ago, I'm a sucker for YouTube videos, as always, and this is kind of where it all started. Is this one here. And so this one is mine. This one is called Tiger. Kind of makes sense, but this one I made, this one's a bright orange one for those on big eyes, and it's actually fairly simple. Kind of looks like your generic monster off Sesame Street. And yeah, I made this 4 or 5 years ago now. I was buying fabric for another project, and I needed the extra like $10 to bump up to get free shipping. So I was like, oh, and what should I get? So I saw a bunch of fur and I was like, I'll just get that and that'll be good. And I put that away. And lo and behold, I was watching my favorite YouTube videos and they were making puppets. I was like, oh, that doesn't look that hard. That looks like fun. So I made my first puppet, and that was this one. And this one occasionally reads to the children at night, and the kids love that one. But because we made the sock puppets last year, I was like, well, maybe we should upgrade their puppets. So the goal was in a day to make these puppets and make 3 of them and have the children involved, because I don't know if you've ever worked with children. There's this fine balance with making things. You want to have them make it so that they can feel like they're involved and they really love the actual being involved in that process. But I've got a range of what have I got? 864. And so like the 4-year-old really doesn't have any attention span, and the 6-year-old doesn't care about anything, and then the 8-year-old wants to do everything but then doesn't realize that these puppets take a couple hours to make. So trying to find that balance of how to make this in a day with them and have them look reasonable. Well, I hit most of those marks. And that's the other thing, right? So what I generally do when I'm working with my children is I'll kind of make a kit for them. So I'll basically put together the base, and then I'll let them pick the colors or pick the accessories. So for all these 3 puppets, and I haven't got the third one because that was in my daughter's room and she's asleep. But basically I built a base out of foam. So you can't really see it, but you can kind of see that sphere shape. And I had some leftover foam, and this was just mattress foam. So just, yellow open cell foam. And I had that left over from like a camping mattress or something. So I cut that in half, made it a little bit thinner. And then if you go on the internet and just look up puppet, Muppet pattern, you'll see a million, but it's almost like a semicircle. And as you join the semicircles together, you get that nice concave, or, you know, that nice shape. And then you usually have some kind of mouth mechanism, which I can't even remember what I used for these. Oh, I used foam, EVA foam, but you could use like MDF or cardboard, something like that. Like I think this one here, I used foam board. So just some kind of mechanism that opens and shuts. And then, yeah, then you glue it together, and then you've got your foam base. So that's what I did first thing. And I actually kind of did that mostly by myself, especially for my boys. I just basically put that together in half an hour, and didn't worry about it. My daughter was actually interested to help. So I let her kind of help me with that process. And there's a couple ways you can cut it. I just used a blade for most of it, but then I ended up using my bandsaw to cut it as well. And the reason for that is because I can get it on an angle. And so when you're joining two pieces together that are flat, you'll get a flat top. And with, obviously, you want to build some kind of curve, you kind of want a bit of an angle. And I could set that curve on the bandsaw, and I could just quickly slice it through. So that was actually helped me out quite a bit. But then other than that, you can just use a blade, like a Stanley blade, or yeah. But yeah, and then you glue it together. So there's a couple ways you can glue it together. You can use proper like foam spray contact adhesive. I think that's what I used for this one. But for these ones, I ended up just using hot glue for everything. So it works really well. And this is something that I kind of did myself. I didn't really let the children do that, because the problem with foam is it retains heat. It's an insulator. So when you're using hot glue, it takes forever to cool down. So I actually had my children using the air compressor to blow on it to kind of cool it down quicker while I held it. And they loved that, because then they were just blowing the air compressor air everywhere and blowing dust everywhere. So they were having fun. And then we had like our base. And so then what I generally do is I go to the children and go, well, what do you want it to look like? And so my youngest loves green, and I had an old hoodie. This is actually an old hoodie. This is the sleeve of it. Turned it inside out, and yeah, and we basically sewed that up together. Well, actually, I sewed it up and then I stuck it on. And so basically, when I came to him, it was just like a green head. And then I could go to him and go, well, what do you want on it? And he's like, oh, I want green spikes, and I want it to be a dragon, and it needs to have eyes. So then what I did is I made up a bunch of eyes and ears and spikes. And this is just the same foam, same yellow foam, just cut out, and then I just spray painted it green with some spray paint. And then, yeah, made some teeth out of some foam, EVA foam. And then I basically just had it all ready to go. And then I sat down with him and went, well, where do you want it? And if it was ridiculous, I was like, how about we put it here? Or how about, and kind of nudging him in direction so it might not look as terrifying, which I failed in, but yeah, he loves it. So yeah, and then we put it all together, and then it hasn't really left his hand since. So yeah, and then the other one was kind of a similar process. Is I had this beautiful like fake wool mat that I'd bought just to kind of have around, and so I ended up using that. And yeah, my son wanted big red horns, so again, yellow foam spray paint. Need to put some more glue on that, but yeah, some ping pong balls, table tennis balls for the eyes, just spray painted red. But yeah, so that is what we have been working on. Like I said, the biggest challenge is I always want to jump in and make it, because my daughter is at the age now where she knows what she wants in her mind, but she doesn't really understand how to get there. So she has a vision in her mind of what we're making, but she doesn't know that the steps she's taking won't get her in that get her to that end process. And trying to guide her so that she can get her a product that she's happy with, but she's still able to make those decisions along the way, is, I find, one of the hardest challenges. Because if you just let them just go, you end up with something that doesn't look anything like anything. But if you do it all yourself, obviously they don't have any input. And so trying to find that happy medium of where they're contributing and they feel like they're contributed, because the funny thing is if you ask the kids, like my youngest, he'll say he made this, you know what I mean? And he really didn't do anything, but that's not, to me, that's not important. It's what he, perception is reality, right? If he perceives that he made it, then in that's what's important to me. But yeah, and so I think next year we're going to have to up our game a little bit and see what else we can do. But yeah, so that's what I've been working on. And the best thing about it is I literally, it cost me probably a packet of hot glue. Really, everything else was stuff I had lying around. I didn't buy anything, which was always the best thing for a project like this, is just being able to go out into the shed and having all the pieces and just knocking it out.
Yeah, that's I think especially with puppets, using what you have is what ends up with the most interesting puppets. And I think those ones are awesome. I love them. Like they look great. They're so goofy, and like I think that's what a puppet should be. They've got character.
Yep.
So question about hot glue.
Yes.
Because I didn't know this until recently, that not all hot glue guns are created equal.
Yeah.
You have to use a certain temp when you're using hot glue on foam like that.
No, I don't think so. I would recommend a more industrial glue rather than just kind of the absolute generic hot glue. So I have this love-hate relationship with hot glue. When it works, it's the great. Like when I made these, it was basically the greatest product ever, apart from all the burns on my fingers. But like the kids have slept with these, and these are just hot glued on. All right, like it's incredible that the spikes on this thing are still on. I can't believe I was expecting to have to have fixed this already in the last 2 weeks that we've had them, but they haven't, and that's a testament to the hot glue. So what I've found, and I've gone through quite a few. When I was in the US, I had one that I was given by my parents that was meant to be like a cordless one, so it must have had like a heating element in it that kept it warm. And that one, it never really worked for me. Then I got another one, which was just the cheapest one I could find. I think it was at a Hobby Lobby or a Michael's, and that thing worked great. It didn't even drip. Like, you know how usually when you leave a hot glue on and it'll just slowly drip out the end? That one didn't even drip. That was by far the best hot glue I've ever had. And the secret I find is I don't have any of the fancy ones where you can adjust the temperature. I've just got the ones that are generic. And the trick is letting them heat up and making sure they're hot. And then the other secret is once don't put any tension on them until they're completely cool. And know your surfaces. So a fabric, because it's got so much surface area, it will grab really well. But if you've got something like a fur, you know, you've got to remember that you're only adding it to wherever the glue can touch. So you kind of want to shave away and get down up below the fur for that hot glue to be most effective. And then you do have to check to see the glue types, because typically in a craft store you can pick up like a low temperature hot glue, which doesn't make any sense. And then there's like a high temp. And I would usually recommend just going with the high temp, because then you've got that biggest temperature difference, because you do hear horror stories of people leaving things in cars and over in the summer and them getting too hot and falling apart. But so far I've never, if used correctly, and I mean a lot of the times I haven't used it correctly, I haven't let it heat up hot enough, or I've tried to move it while it's still warm. And that's probably the biggest limitation with the foam, is that if you're gluing two pieces of foam together, you've now put it in between basically really good insulators. And so you've got to wait quite a while for it to cool. I've heard of people putting it in water. So if you have like an ice bath or something, you can put the hot glue together and then dump it in that. And obviously the water won't hurt the foam. But I have dabbled with the idea of buying some of the high-end kind of more industrial glue sticks where you can adjust the temperature. You can get ones that have like electrical push mechanisms So you're not like normally your trigger mechanism is what pushes it. But it's definitely a tool that I would recommend everybody have. Just because the glue sticks last forever. They're not noxious really in any way. And it doesn't take up a lot of room. And it's good for a project like this. And I find that if you do need to put fabric on something, it is one of the quickest and easiest ways to just get it on there rather than trying to hand sew it on or do other things if you need to just get it done. I mean, my wife, for a costume last year for my son, she made like a bow tie in 10 minutes or something using just hot glue and folding it over and stuff like that.
Yeah, I use one when I'm filling cracks in wood with epoxy. Like this one, I had cracks that were not major, but needed to be filled and stabilized. And so I've found that taping the bottom of the crack, and then you make a dam around what you're filling with hot glue, so that you can put enough epoxy in there that as the bubbles come out and it seeps down in, you don't end up with voids in the crack. And that was where I learned my lesson, that not all hot glue or glue guns are created equal. Because I had a little tiny cheapie that came from like the dollar store, and it was great. But I was doing a bigger project, and like I'm just firing through these tiny little glue sticks, so I wanted something bigger. So I went and got one, and it was much hotter than that little one was, and it had a high temp glue that came with it. And so when you use that, it comes out much thinner. It doesn't hold form like that low temp glue does. So I ended up taking that one back and getting one that has a high-low setting. So that I can really, because I need something to hold its form, to build up a higher wall around those cracks. That was a learning experience for me.
And I would, and kind of what I was talking about is the opposite. You really want it to get into that really runny state, because that's what will run it in. But hot glue, people love it for building molds, like silicon molds. Foam board and hot glue is almost universally the way to go, because then you can just snap the foam boards off and you've got your mold sitting there. I go through phases with hot glue, because sometimes you use it, you just end up with stringies everywhere, and it's just like, oh, why am I using this? This is terrible. And then you will not use it for a year or two, and then you'll pull it out and you'll be like, oh, why haven't I been using this? This is a great tool. And then you'll use it a whole bunch, and then suddenly you'll be like, oh, why am I using this? This is just a pain in the butt. And then it's a tool you have, and it's a tool you want to learn how to use, but sometimes it's just frustrating to use. And obviously you've got to be careful with it, because you can burn yourself. And by the end of this process, because I was putting two pieces of foam together and I was kind of pinching it, the hot glue would kind of bubble out all over my fingers, and they were pretty sore for a couple of days. But it's always it's definitely one of those things where it's a tool you got to have it. I feel it's one of those, but one day I'll probably upgrade to the real high-end ones. But for now, I find that if you can find one that doesn't drip out endlessly when you've got it on, then you've got a winning hot glue gun. Because anytime you forget to turn it off and then you come back and there's a pool of all your hot glue, you're like, so frustrating.
I've also found for cooling it off, what I use is I use a canned air. Like you use for blowing out your keyboard, and just turn it upside down and spray. Freeze it like that.
I've done that too. 100%. So cool. Well,
do you have any teasers of what we may be seeing on your workbench next week?
I think I might. I'll pull something actually off my workbench.
Okay.
I could talk about these, which are some shadow boxes I'm putting together, but I'm not that happy with them, so I probably won't talk about them. But
no, that's a great reason to talk about them.
No, I think a project that I've meant to have been working on for the last 2 years, must be almost 2 years. I think I've had this particular fabric floating around. Now this is a special fabric. This is actually ballistic nylon, which is also known as Kevlar. So turns out, spoiler alert, it's really hard to cut Kevlar when you're trying to make something with it. Who knew? Who knew? The other interesting thing about it is that, see how it's got a really frayed edge? You can't, like, if that was cotton, you could come along with a flame and just kind of like burn that edge off and make it all nice and crisp. This stuff doesn't burn. It's almost like it was designed not to burn under friction. The more you know.
Well, I'm interested to see what the heck you have Kevlar for.
You don't have any? I've had this lying around the house for like 2 years.
I'm pretty sure the only Kevlar I have is on my welding pants. Awesome. Well, if people are just jonesing to see more of what you're doing before our next podcast, where can they find you?
I guess your spoiler is you're going to be continuing working on your cribbage.
Well, I better have it done because I deliver it next Friday.
Oh wow! Oh wow!
So we better be able to talk about the base.
Yeah. I hope so. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. I was like, what are we going to talk about here? I was like, of course that's what we're going to talk about. But yeah, so more of me can be found at craftybeetroot.com or the YouTubes. Search Crafty Beetroot and you will find me because nobody has such a ridiculous name. How about you, Chili?
You can find me at orwoodsolutions.com or search for Orwood Solutions on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. It's also a pretty unique name, so you'll find me.
Perfect. And if you want to find more about the podcast, we have this podcast on YouTube. If you're watching it there, you've found it. What's on your workbench will find us on the YouTubes. If you are listening to us, you can also find us on YouTube. Or if you're on YouTube, you can find us on podcasts. Search What's on Your Workbench. We should be everywhere. iTunes, Spotify. We're hosted on Podbean. So our website for the podcast is what'sonyourworkbench.podbean.com. There should be links in whichever medium you're searching this on. So, and with that, we will find out next week what's on your workbench.